Good day, everyone, and welcome back, and welcome to our final session of the day. I'm super excited about this panel discussion. Um, Talking about sustainable transformation is something that we've had kind of a stream through the entire day. And Agile is something I'm particularly passionate about. After leading the implementation at Optus, I actually saw the power of it for kind of igniting the people in an organization. So I'm really excited to hear about the sustainable and agile transformation across the business with this group. I'll do a quick intro and then hand over to the group who are going to facilitate for themselves. We're really lucky to have Rena Silas, Rebecca Kennedy, and Mark Comer join us today. Might have you guys just quickly, I think, Rebecca, you'll probably have something you'll want to talk to in introducing the group, but just to stay in theme, could I grab a quick fun fact from the three of you, starting with Rena?
I wasn't planning for that one. Fun fact, I was born in the USSR and speak Russian. So I love to sit on public transport and listen to Russian conversations, pretending I don't understand what's going on.
I love that. I'm the same. I have two things that happen. One, I'll go to Yumcha and they'll start talking to me in Chinese, which I can understand Mandarin, but then I'll answer in English and they give me the immediate poo-poo. or I'll be somewhere in public where people will be talking about me, wondering, what type of Asian I am. And then if it's Chinese, I'll answer and they'll be mortified. So interesting fun fact. That's lovely. USSR, born in the USSR. How about you, Rebecca?
Okay, cool. A fun fact about me. So I'm really into salsa dancing. So that's how I met my husband.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's a little bit different, but yeah, it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Sassy. Salsa dancing is sassy. Yes. And Mark, I don't know how you're going to back that one up.
Oh, no, I don't. Yeah, international, not international, dancer as well, so not too much fun. I don't know, maybe we've had a bit of a menagerie of pets, a rabbit, fish, dog, lizard. We even had a pet snail at one point for one of the kids as well. So, yeah, a range of different pets we have continuously around the house. I've resisted requests from the kids a lot of times for a pet mouse or a pet rat. That's not going to happen.
How many at once?
Probably, I think with a fish, bird, rabbit, lizard, put the snail in there. Why not? 5, and we've got a new puppy as well just recently. So, but the rabbit's long gone. Got taken by a fox, I think. Yeah.
And where are you guys located? I only asked that, Mark, because I live up in the upper North Shore, and there seem to be bunnies everywhere right now.
Yeah, well, I'm in Melbourne, in eastern suburbs. So, yeah, just coming out of lockdown tonight.
Yeah, fantastic. How about you, Rena?
Lower North Shore, Wen. So I have the fortune of kookaburras and possums and a lot of bush turkeys.
Yeah, a lot of them. And Rebecca?
I'm like Mark. I'm in Melbourne, so out of lockdown tonight, which is good.
It'll be interesting to see if Melbourne, the nightlife goes crazy tonight with everyone coming out of lockdown. So thanks so much for joining us for this panel. Over to you. Have fun.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. So just by way of introduction, my name is Rebecca Kennedy, and I'm currently leading the Business Intelligence Strategy and Execution for Finance at ANZ Bank. And today I'm going to be chairing with today's panel discussion. And for the next half an hour, we're going to hear from two really experienced and seasoned transformation leaders on that topic of embedding sustainable and agile transformation across the business. So as we hear from the panelists, please feel free to ask any questions via the Q&A function, and we can answer them at the end. So introducing Rena Silas and Mark Comer to the panel. Rena is a leader in business transformation with diverse experience in customer strategy, M&A, finance, process improvement, marketing, and she spent the last decade at the Woolworths Group in leadership roles across each of its transformations, so such as BWS, Woolworths Food Group, and most recently Big W. Mark is a senior executive with proven leadership success in growing customer revenue across highly competitive sectors, and he defines and implements strategies that deliver transformational change. So Mark joined Cbus Super in June 2017, and he was a part of driving change with the new cloud technology stack, the operating model redesign, and implementation of Agile. And he is now currently the head of group strategy at Australian Super. So one thing that I want to reflect on before we kicked off, and I'm sure that everyone has heard of these, various statistics that, 70 to 80% of transformations fail. And if we just think back to some of the advice that Adam Seltzer from the last previous fireside chat that we just sat through, his advice to his younger self would be, you cannot fail. So it makes me reflect that I'm sure everyone would have like a lot of war stories. What I would like to do with Mark and Rena is focus on those moments during transformation that had an impact on making change embedded and sustainable. So I caught up with Rena last week and we were reflecting on her experiences with transformation. Rena, you had 3 cases across Woolworths Food Group, BWS and Big W requiring a pretty decent turnaround. So whether or not that was from losing market lead to brand performance compared to competitors or disconnecting with customers. So I'm going to dive straight into one of the most important factors I believe in, and that's addressing culture as a foundation to sustaining change. And I've seen significant change happen at ANZ Bank. And one of the best things at the forefront was our CEO advocating growth mindset. And I feel like it's been really normal to talk about that in everyday conversation. Most of us have a copy of Dr. Carol Dweck's mindset book, and it's really underpinned in our performance. So Rena, from your experiences, what ingredients have had an impact on changing culture to embed that sustainable change?
Thanks, Beck, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me. It's I think it'll be a great conversation with you and Mark today. Look, I think it's a great question. And you mentioned I've been across all 3 turnarounds, and I've been listening in on today, and I think one of the things I was reflecting on is, as strategists, we often kind of launch into, what's the vision, what's the strategy, and what are the list of initiatives that will get us there. And I don't think you can really underestimate how important it is to have the right culture, the right mindset to be open and to be able to really embed and sustain change. And when I look back on the experiences across all 3 turnarounds or transformations, there's some really interesting themes that I found come up. So if I think back to the start of each of those journeys in BWS and in food, and more recently in Big W, and I think about what the climate was like, scarcity, opposite of growth mindset, as you mentioned, pretty kind of lonely place to work, and very much, very, very little innovation, very little collaboration. And when I think about actually, what are the things that really turn that around, there's really 2 things that I think are really important. And the first was really establishing a common purpose. And as an ex-finance person, you mentioned purpose to me, and I get a little bit uncomfortable. I need P&Ls, I need numbers, I need things to measure. Purpose just doesn't quite feel comfortable for me. And so, but when I look back at all 3 of those stories, there was a really clear call to change. And so for Big W most recently, and I'll talk to it in a moment, there was a real realization that, hey, we're all here for the same goal, and we want to make a real difference for families, and that's what Big W is about. So interesting, again, if I go back to the start of those journeys, there was no conversations of customers, let alone no conversations of team. We weren't talking about people. We were talking a lot about sales, and we were talking a lot about profit, but not a lot about our customers and our team. So embedding that, starting with our purpose was a real important first step. And then, to pick up your point around the growth mindset, we had to really put a mirror up and look at the behaviors and the culture that we had in our organizations. Big W, as a great example, had something like 5 leaders over 5 years, very change fatigued, very distrustful, very cynical. That is not a great bedrock for great transformation and turnaround. And 3 years ago, we were facing into $150 million profit loss. And so, come 3 years later, we've just posted a $50 million gain. And when I look back, really there were 2 things in that cultural change that we did very well. And one was empowering and giving back autonomy to our front lines. So once we started talking about customers, we recognized that actually our store teams were the ones that were closest to that customer. So in most cases, they actually knew the customer better than we in support team. We in support team did. And I remember in BWS, one of the most subtle things we did that had such a great impact was we had the store manager as the CEO. And we recognized that actually our store leadership, BWS had close to 1,000 stores all across Australia, some that might not see an area or state manager for months at a time. They were the ones that really could make great decisions to benefit our customers, from giving them more options in what we ranged to, how giving them budgets for certain incident, to support a customer, even stories like a customer forgot their credit card and so, our store manager paid for that. Those were the great stories that gave proof points back to the purpose. So we gave the autonomy back to our front lines. And secondly, we had to actually really realize that our support office was somewhat dysfunctional. So we had to learn to work together. We had to learn to be collaborative. Our problems were getting a lot more complex and we couldn't solve them as individuals or even, single functions. And it was actually, now that I look back on it, it was actually the start of what would be an agile transformation. And we actually ended up getting an external facilitator to support our leadership. And initially in Big W, we had a leadership program with 50 leaders. So it was that Exco and our heads of. And then actually now the latest numbers, we're going to have 500 people through that program by the end of this year. And if I think about, the culture that's created, it's all about growth mindset. It's all about, empathy, being open to learn and asking your curious questions, being able to pick up the phone and go, hey, I've got a great idea. What do you think about this? That wouldn't have happened. What we can do today wouldn't have happened had we not spent the time up front to really get that foundation right. So back to your question, Beck, I think you can't skip this step. You can't not spend enough time in really getting to know the cultural climate of an organization as you start a turnaround or transformation.
That's actually, really good, Rena. And how about yourself? What are your thoughts on that, Mark, especially around having that really clear purpose and I guess maybe addressing behaviors? Like, Rena, when you mentioned behaviors, that just reminded me of this saying is that a behavior that you walk past is a behavior accepted. And, I kind of really resonate with that. But how about yourself, Mark?
Oh, no, yeah, I mean, I agree. All the comments, and it's good hearing Rena's journey as well. Just the common purpose and alignment in terms of where we're going is really important. And then I think also keeping people engaged and communicating with them constantly and listening to them and helping them be part of it as well. Also, for a couple of reasons. One, it can inform where you're heading. The transformations, it's not necessarily where you start the journey. You keep going on that pathway all the way through to the end. You need to be able to sort of be agile and move and adapt your approach. And if you do that, one, you get a bit better outcome. But then also, two, I think you also get a stronger engagement with the people, and they'll probably be a little bit more forgiving. So allow you to make a few mistakes and take on a few risks if they feel they're going to be part of the journey and aligned around the purpose as well. So they're more friendly to you than if you're sort of trying to do things to them necessarily.
That's good. As we talk about culture and mindset, like this is what really underpins Agile ways of working. So, Mark, I know that you've been knee deep in Agile transformation, and it's a huge topic. I'm a really big fan. I'm not an expert, and I've worked with some amazing Agile coaches at ANZ, and they work magic. And just thinking about some of those, I guess, teething examples I've seen when trying to embed Agile as a way of working. One example that I could talk to was that, when we went through that initial change phase and we were getting into the rhythm of BAU, there were these little kinks that needed ironing out. And, one that comes to mind is really similar to car enthusiasts, right? And so, you have the fans that are the purists and then those that do those heavy modifications to the cars. And, it's just a bit like Agile, right? So you have the Agile purists and then the Agile modifiers. And sometimes that can create a bit of misalignment and some noise about how to go about things. My rule of thumb is that if something doesn't feel like it's working, then just stop and adjust to it and adjust to something that does work. The other thing is that you guys probably would have seen, but Deloitte has this huge diagram. It's a subway map of Agile, and it's a great visual to remind us that there are many different options for different scenarios and situations. A second example that I could probably reference is that when parts of the organization work in an Agile way and then other parts work in a waterfall style, and for good reason, the annual investment approval process is designed for waterfall, but not an Agile iterative planning style. And that's a little bit of a kink I found with transitioning to BAU. But look, there's lots of other, pieces, whether or not that's around like what Rena said about, are we engaging with the customer enough? Are we incorporating customer feedback more? Does the team have enough autonomy, to speed up that decision making? Exactly what you're talking about, Rena, with getting the store managers to have their own budgets. These are just a couple that come to mind just to consider when embedding that sustainable change, especially like transitioning Agile to BAU. This question's for you, Mark. So, in your experiences, have you come across this and what did you think helped the transition of Agile and embedding that into BAU?
Yeah, so I think to your point, Rebecca, it sort of feels like there's sort of that, the purists and the other ways to do it. But then also, there's also at times a challenge whereby you use an excuse that you're not an Amazon or an ING. So we're not them, so we're not going to follow their pathway, which is good. You should recognise what you are and what you are not. But then also sometimes you can use that as a bit of an excuse to sort of not commit at times on certain things. So the way in which I found what worked really well for our team anyway at CBUS was that we had a large transformation. It's generally a really greenfield site. So we had no CRM system, no data, no identity system, portal system. Everything else, it pretty much is entirely outsourced. And so it's a greenfield site. And for those of you who've worked in complex businesses, you don't have to unwrap the spaghetti of the architecture. So that was really nice. But the other challenge was that all the people were pretty greenfields as well. And so they're coming in. So what we did is we had certain aspects around that were effectively waterfall in terms of our large drops that we were building up to get to that point to put it in place. And so what we did, though, is we started to introduce Agile methodologies. So we had teams, we had product owners, we had the ceremonies around stand-ups and scrums, we had showcases, we used Jira and Confluence and all those sort of tools to start to move down that pathway, but also gave a bit of, the confidence for senior stakeholders and the CEO that they were understanding they're going to get something at the end, rather than sort of explaining around features and sets to get to that. But it's also the best approach for what we're at that time. But then as we went through and started delivering things in that space, we also started to introduce pure Agile teams. And probably the best example that I can think of would be the data area. So we delivered a data platform, new system, data lake, or put that all in place. And that was pretty much a waterfall project, effectively, focused on the cost and price and the outcome and the delivery dates, but then all the reporting and dashboards associated with an assurance, we weren't really clear what we'd need as a business as we're starting to do that from our operational perspective. We were also introducing new teams. So ops assurance didn't exist, compliance didn't exist. In operational compliance. Of course, we had compliance at CBUS, don't get me wrong. Those things were sort of new, so that we really didn't know. So we followed that real approach around thinking about what we needed, sprints, dropping things, changing and adjusting and putting that in place. So that sort of was a nice blend to get something over the line, so we weren't feeling or the teams weren't feeling excess pressure around what they're delivering, and had a bit of time to adjust and pivot to that, but then also started to educate the business around ability to change and think about things and go, actually, you don't need to have clear vision in terms of what you want if you don't really know it. You don't sort of have to pretend, and as you learn and grow through it, you can adapt to get to that spot. So that was it. I think we called it fit for purpose approach. We transitioned across to that way of thinking, which has been really quite effective. And I think part of the other thing as well, to your point, Rebecca, around the finance model and how things get allocated as well, having it sort of blended a little bit has also helped, I think, some of the Agile teams to understand that whilst they want to deliver things continuously and have that ongoing bucket of money, businesses are businesses, so there's going to be times where there's more pressure on. And actually, Agile is handy in that if, say, you had $5 million or $6 million per year to continually invest, if you only have $1 or $2 million, you can still actually do a lot of work and features and enhancements, and you just change things and get some great outputs, as opposed to thinking, oh, if I don't have that X $million, I can't do project A or project B. So you can sort of continue to develop and run those things through. So it's taken a while, and certainly you have people who come in and they've worked in really high Agile environments, and they really struggle with it. It's not quite as much as they'd want to get to, and then others who have a different approach and philosophy sort of adapt and move with it as well. But don't get me wrong, it's a continued challenge to continue to explain what it means for new people coming in, particularly senior managers who haven't necessarily worked in and experienced it, and they're used to having commitments and putting things in place, and having a MVP type approach is quite challenging for them. And then when things do go a bit askew, and the pressure's on from minor things, it's generally okay. When it becomes a bit of a bigger item, that's when some of the pressure comes through naturally. So then you have to work through that as well.
Yeah, that's really good. And I guess that kind of moves me into the next question, because you're talking a little bit about the team and whether or not the team is feeling any pressure. It makes me reflect on, sometimes we don't have enough resources or the right resources, or, resources trying to do this on the side of their desk. Rena, I know that you've got a really good example about capacity planning. So is that something that it'd be great for you to share a little bit about that?
Sure, and I echo Mark, because I think Woolies, varying degrees of, an Agile transformation in its own right, where we've got some places that have just recently gone fully Agile, but more kind of operational, traditional, Big W and the actual food group still kind of in that quasi space of we've got some Agile squads and still between waterfall and Agile. So yeah, always quite difficult to balance the two. But yeah, just to answer your question, Rebecca, I think. And I think about one of the sessions I was listening to this morning about, oh God, you're adding more work to me, and I was thinking, yeah, we've been there. I guess when you've got such a huge transformation roadmap, and there's a lot of change going into, in our case, our stores. We worked out quite quickly that we couldn't land the change very effectively, let alone embed it, if we didn't set up our store teams. And at the time, we were already getting feedback that there was just no capacity to do anything over and above. And so what we did, and we did it when I joined Big W, but also as part of Food Group, was we created a system called capacity planning. And it's really simple at its heart. It's just dealing with that traditional bottleneck. And for us, the stores was a traditional bottleneck. Where they only had a certain amount of hours in the week, and had to complete all their tasks and serve the customer. And so what we worked out very simply is, we modeled how many hours the store teams had each week. That was the capacity, and we modeled out all the basic tasks that they had to complete. And so we quickly worked out week to week, where was the headroom? And for a business like BW, it's quite a seasonal business. That could vary week to week substantially. And so we worked out where was the best time to land certain initiatives into stores. At the same time, we created what we call the capacity planning ecosystem. And 3 years ago in BW, this was the first cross-functional team that we actually had. We had IT and change and finance and training and format development, all around the table to assess initiatives as they were coming into store, to kind of, have we thought through all perspectives? Are we making the change easy for our store teams? What have we missed in this? And where we were breaching, when we sized up all of the initiatives and the impact to the stores, where were we breaching capacity, which we could then escalate to the Exco. And what we ended up doing was stitching together the BAU, the rhythm that we knew already existed in stores, together with the extra work came from the initiatives. And we were able to give our store teams that visibility for the first time. And, Mark, you talk about communication. We didn't, this communication was not a thing, in the past. Store teams didn't really see anything coming. So this was a real huge change for them, because they could actually roster and plan accordingly, and we could actually, get momentum in our turnaround to really change process in stores quickly. So yeah, it's when I look back on it, I think that's a really important piece, stitching together that BAU and the constant drum of transformation for those experiencing the change.
Thanks, Rena. That's a really good example of capacity planning and managing that execution and resourcing requirements. If I move to stakeholders and leadership, which ties in a little bit back into the culture at the start, what happens when you don't have leadership or stakeholders aligned? And when I've spoken to people from various different organizations, it's actually a lot more common than what you think. And I've heard of various strategies to move past it, right? So you can have some simple tactics like do the good old little lots of one-on-ones pre-meetings before the meeting to get everyone around the table across the decision, and then have those questions answered, get buy-in alignment that way. Or that other tactic of, putting a positive spotlight on the supporters and really relying on that being contagious and getting alignment that way. Or, the other tactic of having the layers underneath the line. So it's what Rena, I think you mentioned the other day, it's nothing to see here, everything's moving along. Mark, have you come across any examples like this of trying to align stakeholders and leadership, and tips on sustaining that when that happens?
I think, Rebecca, everything you've described then is pretty much spot on in terms of that. I remember as this transformation kicked off, it was spending time with the board, spending time with the CEO. It was, in the first few weeks, I think I added up, I was spending 3 or 4 hours with each executive per week, and then as a collective group, 4 or 5 hours per week, just trying to get all that up and running. And we also put in place change champions as well, so really going into the business. And so they're really effective in terms of getting people aligned, and then things like showcases and outputs, and then also ensuring that the transformation wasn't done to it, as sort of co-led, co-delivered, and there's a lot of knowledge transfer. So a lot of people were pulled in to be part of the program. We'd sort of backfill their BAU role, they'd be there, but they'd still report into their heads of a group executive to make sure that they're delivering for them. So that's really important to get them engaged. I probably, to be frank, and I was thinking about earlier in the conversations we've had over the last few days, and also the point around 70-80% of transformations failing. And I think one of the things that which I think is a learning, which I think could even continue to do better on, is around engaging really senior stakeholders when there's a change. So when you've got part of the transformation is you get the CEO on board and you get the executives and everyone's aligned and you're moving forward, and it's a hard journey, and all the stuff I mentioned earlier about being forgiving and helping each other out. Sometimes when you're sort of 2/3 of the way through and 4/5, 7/8 of the way through, there's a new executive come in, or a couple of new executives, or even a new CEO that comes in, part of the challenge is that they're going to come in and question what's happening and why it's happening, and some of that is really hard work and can really, in some ways, potentially derail a lot of really good work that's been done up to that point. I won't. And I wasn't involved in it and that sort of stuff. When I think about Telstra, one of the things that Saltra here did, which is, and he had a pretty negative name at times on various pieces. One of the big transformations he really drove through, which he was absolutely hammered for, was putting in place a 3G network across the country. And so then when the iPhone came and everything else, that was a huge transformation. It was a big step, it was bold, and it certainly was criticised heavily. Later on, it came to be, well, that's actually the differentiator for Telstra for many years in terms of what's put in place. But I think in reflecting on what to do with those stakeholders when they come in, is, of course, you've done the hard yards early, but spend as much time with the new senior stakeholders as they come in, with a range of stakeholders across the board, their peers and people. I think ensure their expectations are clear. Sometimes when a new executive or person comes in, they've been sold the future state of the transformation as opposed to where you might be. So they might be coming in going, well, the whole Adobe marketing suite's in place. They've got the full CRM. They've got an omni-channel. It's all sort of really happening. The reality might be actually will be there in a year or 2 or 3 years. If they've come in and ready to go and it's not quite there, that could be a sense of frustration. So trying to help them understand where you are and where you've come from as well. I think they're pretty open. And I think also the final point is that try to be really open to new ideas. So I think, as I said earlier, the transformation move, your journey, your approach, you're getting a rhythm, you're humming along, things are going really well, but spend the time to pause, and new people coming in, as hard as it is to sort of pause and maybe change direction and pivot a bit, it might be the best outcome as well, and that'll help them feel engaged and aligned and part of the process as well, because once the transformation's finished in 12 months, 18 months, the operating model transformation and new ways of working and thinking, that the transformation is not complete until that's done. And then even then it's the next phase of transformation which needs to kick off then as well. So I think it's really important to think about those. And otherwise the challenge is that people come in and 12 or 18 months down the track, things aren't being used. People go, we have to start again here. We're doing a sawtooth investment. We're out of step. Let's move forward. Hopefully things like Agile and continuous change and MVP and that type of thing helps instill that a process as continual iteration. But they're some of the things that I think need to be put in place. So engage them, understand, make sure they've got the context, spend time with them, be ready to pivot, but also just be patient and if you have to re-explain things again, and you've like a Broadway show, it's the 300th night, sort of you still got to perform. So maybe try it that way.
That's good. While we're on that topic, I've got a question coming from the audience. This is from Sue Allen Howie, so thank you very much for posting your question. Mark, can you describe the role of your change champions and what was their purpose versus a project team?
Sure. So the change champions met together fortnightly, and what we do is we give them a sense in terms of what the overall project was doing, the key streams. They would get input in terms of the showcases that were coming through, and they'd be asked to go and share that and communicate with their group. They also were specifically asked to come back and get feedback from the teams. If they felt they're under too much pressure to get work done, we'd take on that feedback. If they felt that things weren't being explained properly, we sort of built a pretty good relationship with them, saying, I was saying this, and like, no, don't get it. I can't explain that. No, I don't know what you mean. So we sort of built a strong relationship with them. The change project team worked closely with them. They would probably come along for be half an hour every fortnight to understand what was happening. We'd usually, there's quite often a bit of morning tea being passed around to sort of get them engaged and attending as well. But it was quite useful to get that input. And then as things got going and they understood the approach we're putting in place, they would come to us with new ideas and initiatives and say, actually, I know we're talking about the member portal doing this, or assurance reporting covering these things. What would be really good is if we had this, and they'd understand that they'd be heard, they'd be listened to, they could put in place an initiative on behalf of the people they worked with, and then to put that in place. So yeah, that was the intent. And effectively we had we ensured that we had, when we asked volunteers to be put in place, we did sort of have to knock a few back, because if we found we had too many in one team, and we had none in some of the channels, we'd sort of work actively to get them recruited to make sure we had a nice spread across the whole business.
Five minutes left. So in the last couple of minutes, it would be really good just, I guess, to hear from you both on any of, your final tips or tricks for, getting that change embedded and sustainable. So, Rena, did you have any last minute tips and tricks?
Well, if I think about, maybe just reflect on the last year, I guess. There's been a lot of conversation about COVID today. And I think about how great, how I think very well Woolies actually fared through it, and as well did Big W. I think looking back on it, it was actually just being able to really quite quickly work together and form those groups that needed to solve problems. So I think about and again, having the listening to our customers at the heart of it. One of the things that we found when COVID first hit was we actually didn't have a great process in place to deal with the amount of volume we're receiving from customer questions, customer queries. So, we went from probably several hundred to several thousand in a matter of days. And where typically we had a couple of people that would run around the support office going, hey, can you answer this? Can you answer that? All of a sudden we were just inundated. So I formed a very quick, squad that was, we just had to create, a very quick process that could solve for this. And, my tip here is, and we ended up using Jira. It was my first time doing it, and now I'm actually a Jira expert apparently, which doesn't quite feel like it fits my personality, but that's okay. But what it gave us was it actually just connected our organization really quickly. So I think the tip here is find ways to build structures that allow you to find people quickly. Because I think, the companies that were quite successful over the last year were the ones that could actually bring those expertise to the table very quickly and solve those problems. And in the same way we used the same sort of way to bring people together over getting drive-throughs when Victoria was in lockdown. So we built 27 drive-throughs in Big W's across Victoria within weeks. And it was all because we could just get the right people very quickly connected to solve the problems and get on and do it. So, but back to probably my first, your first question in the session is you need to have the right culture to enable that.
Good, thanks. And how about yourself, Mark?
I think great points from Rena. I probably would add just we celebrated quite a bit, but probably they're always long journeys. So celebrate regularly and frequently and explain what that is for both, recognise the people, what they've done, but also what it means for members. I mean, we're a very member-focused organisation, so by putting in place a new portal that saved 2 minutes on the join-in, we had 80% more people had updated their beneficiaries, which is really important if something was to happen to them for insurance purposes. So really sort of draw those things into so they can actually relate to, that's good because that's why we're here and this is what happens for the member. And then I think that the team and the culture you get involved in, you sort of remind people what they've done then is actually part of the journey we've been on. So when we had COVID, we set up a remote contact center to answer advice calls, but do reception, outbound calling, everything else as well within 48 hours. So we had put in place cloud solutions and setups and everything else as well. So technically we were able to do it in a day or so, but then the teams working together, we just got to get this done. We'll come together. We'll support each other. New processes, system, compliance, legal sign-offs, everything else as well to get up and running and answer our member calls within 48 hours. So that was really exciting. And we said, because we did the journey we've been on here, this is why we can do this. And they've gone on, put on web chat, a whole heap of different things as well since then. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. That's really good. Look, our time's up, but I've really got a lot out of it, and I'm sure that the audience would have too. So a big thank you, Rena, and big thank you, Mark. So what I'll do is I will hand back over to Wen to wrap up for today.
Thanks, Beck.
Thanks, guys. That was an awesome session. And it's interesting as I reflect on the day. I don't know how many of you had the opportunity to actually stay for most of the sessions, but it was really interesting. Some of the things that were so salient, the remarks that were really salient to me were around finding your community, transformation doesn't. And there are a few characteristics. So Rena actually asked the question this morning about characteristics of a great CTO. And I've been thinking about that all day, kind of going, okay, so is it this, is it that? And there are lots of attributes of CTOs that make them really great, but there seem to be some common threads. And the ones that I kind of distilled down to in my mind were, there's this optimism bias and belief in the human spirit. There's independent thinking. So you're not afraid to stand alone. It's a very lonely role sometimes. And that you're able to articulate your independent thinking. So you're not afraid, you have some courage in actually holding people to account to a purpose. And finally, you have a tough skin because you have so many things you're trying to balance, and you've got so many kind of human interactions and emotions and reactions coming at you, and be able to kind of hold firm and find that core of strength to keep going and continue being that rudder, I think is something that is really beautiful that I've seen in all of the people that I've talked today. So I wanted to say a couple of thank yous. One, of course, to the panelists and speakers. Without your openness, your generosity of spirit, and your ability to articulate your own experiences and share them, this would have been quite a dry experience. And the fact that there was so much kind of dialogue, so much feedback is really a credit to everyone who was a part of it and who presented. I have to say thank you, of course, to Isaac, who was behind the scenes, practicing with us before the day, making sure that the tech worked, there to answer any questions, and Emma Hodge, who would have spoken to all of us about joining, speaking, or participating in the conference. So thank you to you guys. The final thing is, if everyone could just go onto their screen, this is off the cuff now. If I was really organized, I would have gotten Mentimeter ready and I would have word cloud happening, but I don't, so I'm going to wing it. Could we go to the discussion forum? There's like a little icon that has discussion forum with two little chat boxes. Could you open that? And in the right, you should get a text box that opens up. Without like just initial reactions, what are some words that come to mind about the day and what you heard? So rapid fire, whatever you come up with. And as you're thinking, I just wanted to reflect on one of the things that came up in this discussion forum. Mark talked about change champions, and Adam also touched on it a little bit. He talked about how the answer is in the front line, not in the boardroom, which I loved as a phrase. And it really rung true for me. One of the things that I thought are for me as a non-negotiable, but I thought I would share, is actually not just having the senior leadership alignment in that setup up the front and getting them on board, but that we're going to be really careful and selecting almost like a kitchen cabinet of frontline and other managers. And it's agnostic to title or seniority, but there are people that you handpick based on influence in the organization, their courage and their buy-in to the transformation and the organization. And I've seen that work really well at Spark over in New Zealand. Is a telco that went through a transformation. They did it really well, had about 50 people across the business who are the water cooler leaders, declared them as this forum, and they took their job really seriously in gathering all the real talk around campus and bring it to the table and saying, watch out, or this is going great, and where it worked best wasn't the fact that they had a voice, but the fact that the organization acted on their voice. And that accelerated the mobilization. So I've got a few. We've got authentic, thanks Rebecca, diversity of transformation, common purpose, endurance, empowering frontline. Anyone else have anything they'd like to share? No? Well, then if there's no one else who'd like to, one of the things that's been really interesting throughout the day is the connections on LinkedIn, posting on LinkedIn, finding the community of transformation. This has been a really inspiring, energizing day. I hope for everyone. Please do connect with each other. Feel free to connect with me, and let's keep the dialogue going. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you. Thanks for organising.
Thanks, everybody, for joining the event today and being a part of it. Everyone that's tuned in throughout the day, thank you so much for joining. And thank you to Wen for chairing the event all day. You were an absolute trooper and really, really appreciate that. And to all our speakers, as Wen said, we couldn't do these events without you guys because there'd be no one talking. So thank you so much, everyone, for being involved. I just want to quickly make a note that the sessions will be available on demand, and a link will be sent out to all of you shortly. So keep an eye out for that. But have a great rest of your week and Wednesday afternoon.